Hi, my name is Alex Strawn. I was previously an avionics tech in the United States Coast Guard and am currently transitioning to a career in data analytics. I have always been passionate about sports statistics, analyzing team data, and solving problems. My passion for sports has only grown since I first started playing soccer at the age of 4 and football starting in the 4th grade. My excitement behind data started with sports and grew during the COVID pandemic while I was doing research for myself and my family. During the Savvy Coders Data Analytics and Python Bootcamp, I was lucky enough to be a Scrum Master for my group. I really enjoyed interacting with my group during Agile ceremonies and helping the team when necessary. Today I am here to combine my newfound skills obtained through the Savvy Coders Bootcamp and my passion for sports by answering the following question. Is offense or defense more impactful in college football? Now, why is this important? In Division I college football, there are 5 conferences that make up the Power 5 conference. There are more than just these 5 conferences, of course, but these are the top 5 conferences. They include the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Pac-12, and the Big 12. And if you look at the revenue generated from these 5 conferences, in 2022, they generated over $3.3 billion. So this is something that's very important to the university. I was able to use Kaggle.com to find my data sources and download CSVs for both the 2022 total team statistics as well as recruiting class data since 1980. The first issue I ran into was with Matplotlib. I wanted to create a table comparing defensive stats and offensive stats to teams' win-loss. When sorting the win-loss, Python would not sort it properly due to the dash between the numbers. To fix this issue, I split the win-loss column into a win column and a loss column, and then used these columns to create a win-loss ratio, which I was able to use to sort the scatter plot much better, as seen in the bottom left image. Next, I created a new conferences column, since the team names had their conferences in parentheses, just to make it easier to work with in Tableau. I did this by first extracting the team names and creating a school column. Then I extracted everything in parentheses from the original column to create a conference column. I then dropped the original column and changed the newly created school column back to team for simplicity. Once I was satisfied with my first dataset, I moved on to the recruiting class dataset. To clean this, I merged all the positions into either offense, defense, or special to make it easier to compare offensive and defensive positions. For the athlete position, I chose to put them in the special category since they were not strictly offense or defensive players. I used this condensed recruiting class in SQL to determine how many players were committed to each team and how many of each caliber there were for each school. This would allow me to separate the top recruits in the country for further analysis. In SQL, I selected the last 4 years of recruiting, since those would be the most relevant and those classes would have the most direct impact on the team's success in 2022. Once this was complete, I created a new CSV and named it Condensed Recruiting Class. I then created new CSVs for each specific year in the Condensed Recruiting Class for further analysis if necessary. I then got rid of the seconds in the total time of possession so that I was able to create an average time of possession by dividing the total time of possession by the amount of games played. This allowed the time of possession to come out as decimal places instead of a minute and second format, which is easier to work with in Tableau. The first chart I have here shows the top 25 teams with the most 4 and 5 stars over the last 4 years. At the top, you see Alabama and Georgia, which you might expect as Georgia won the national championship and Alabama has been consistently a very good team. But then you see teams like Texas A&M and Texas, who come in at 3 and 4 on this list, but their records were 5 and 7 and 8 and 5 respectively. You also see there's teams like Oklahoma and Florida 6 and 7. Miami went 5 and 7. And then Auburn went 5 and 7 as well. So you can see just in the top 10 alone, there are plenty of teams that did not perform based on their recruiting numbers. I came to the conclusion that the coaches were more impactful than the caliber of players that you had on your team specifically. This next chart shows the time of possession that your team had and compares it to your defensive ranking. I originally thought that your time of possession would increase your defensive rank just simply because your defense isn't on the field as long. You can see Air Force has the #1 defense, and they also had the #1 time of possession with 36.5 minutes every game. This means that they held the ball 12 minutes longer than their opponent. You can see that this isn't a perfect correlation here, as you have teams like Vanderbilt, who had an average time of possession of 32, but their defense was 123rd ranked in the country. Southern California had almost 32 minutes a game, and their defense was ranked 106. Ohio, same thing. Their time of possession was 32 minutes per game, but their defense ranked above 100. I found this to be a better graph to come up with how the correlation between wins and offense and defense ranks. You can see in the top it's the defensive rank compared to your wins, and in the bottom is your offensive rank compared to wins. The top shows teams like Tennessee, UTSA, Southern California, and TCU all having really poor defenses, but they're still very highly rated as far as the wins that they were able to get. But when you look at the offensive rankings, you see there's really only one, maybe two teams if you include Boise State, with an offense that's poor, but they're generating a lot of wins. So I found this to be more of a correlation between offensive ranking wins than defensive ranking wins. Next is a very similar chart, but it shows the points per game you were able to get versus the points per game your team allowed. You can see again in the points per game for your team, there's much more obvious correlation between this than there is in the points per game allowed. You can see teams like that went 7-7, 13-2 are toward the bottom of the list here in terms of points per game allowed. But in the points per game that you were able to get per game, it's much more obvious that the more wins you have, the higher your points per game are going to be. This is one of my favorite charts, as it shows an overview of teams' offensive and defensive rankings. As you might expect, teams like Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama are all down here at the bottom left corner, which means they had very good defenses and very good offenses. Georgia winning the national championship with a 10th ranked defense and 5th ranked offense. On the flip side of that coin, you have Colorado, 1-11 last year, and their defensive rank was 130, offensive rank 128. So they were almost last in both categories. Teams in the bottom right have very good defenses, like Iowa, for example, ranked 2nd in the country, but their offense was ranked 130th. Or Wisconsin, who had a defense ranked 11th and offense ranked 91st. And in the top left, you have teams such as Tennessee, UCLA, and Southern California, who had really good offenses but really poor defenses. I find it interesting that once you filter out all the teams that did not have 9 or more wins, you can see there are far less teams in this bottom right than there are in the top left. This shows that there's clearly a correlation between how your offense does and how your team does overall. I found that there was more of a correlation between your offense than your defense, which means that your offense has more of an impact on where you might finish for the season. Some of the conclusions that I made was when it comes to modern college football, the offensive side of the ball has the most impact. But just because you have the most or the best players, that doesn't mean you'll be the most successful team. Challenges I faced. The average time of possession being in minute-second format was really something I struggled with because when I was using it in Tableau, The charts just weren't coming out how I wanted to, um, which I went over in the sequel portion. Miami, there's two Miami teams. One is in Florida and one is in Ohio. So when I separated the conferences for Miami came out to be Florida and Ohio, which obviously is incorrect. So I had to go in and correct that afterwards. Next steps, I would love to see how college football has evolved over the past 5, 10, or even 20 years. I can remember a time when it felt like defenses meant the most. I can think back to 2010, 2011, 2012, where Alabama, LSU had the number one, number two defenses, and they were playing for the national championship. But now it's interesting to see that the better your offense is, the more likely you are to be in the national championship game. And then I would love to see, does higher paid coaches equal a more successful season for your team? We already saw that when you look at the recruiting rankings, they don't necessarily match up with how successful the teams were. So I'd love to take a look at the coaches next. And to finish, I would just like to thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And a big thank you to Savvy Coders and everyone who was involved in that organization, because without them, this wouldn't be possible.